So I said this another week, but it certainly applies here. As I was learning right division, I would encounter topics like the two tonight and how those that don't rightly divide will find an answer for these things, and they don't see the distinctions in what Paul says versus uh, typically somewhere else in the New Testament, like the gospel accounts. So one of them is the idea of for many or for all. So let's understand what this is about. So did Jesus die for many, or in a different way of saying it, or only some, or did he die for all? We'll see verses that say for many and for all, and I'll give my understanding of how it is incorrectly explained so that it makes sense to those that don't rightly divide. So, for example, in Matthew 20, verse 28, even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. Yet in First Timothy 2, verse 6, who gave himself a ransom for all to be testified in due time. So back when I didn't rightly divide and I'd hear somebody explain this, or once I came into right division, someone who was clarifying it would try to go and distinguish these two. What someone would say in the case of Matthew is, well, he only died for those that believe. And then Paul's telling us he died for all. This is saying gave a ransom, but that's essentially the same thing. And while only people that believe do get the ransom paid for, Jesus died for all, whether they believe or not. And the question is, why would it say that he gave his life a ransom for many? I'll say pretty clearly, these two contradict each other. And I'll say, if you rightly divide mystery from prophecy, they don't. So before I press on with further scriptures, I'll open the door to comments or discussion, and if I hear silence, I'll keep going.
I don't know if I really understand the argument. It sounds like they're saying that Jesus died simply for many, and it's exclusively for those many. And
So who are
whereas,
who are the many then?
right,
So we're gonna see the explanation, but what some people will say is, well, when it says many, it's only those who believe, and that's not what many means, because we're going to see scriptures that tell you what many means. And yes, it's true that only those who believe will have their ransom paid. But again, what Paul says is Jesus died for all, whether they believe or not. Now, their belief is crucial to their actually receiving the gift. You have to receive the gift. But Jesus didn't just die for some people. And the people that he didn't die for, well, you can't be saved. And that's kind of a Calvinistic view of the scripture. And that's not what it means either. So let's press forward. And if you want to comment or question, as we go on or at the end, you can. You can certainly try to read it in a different way as to what I'm going to present. So let's see a ransom for many. And so we saw what Matthew 20, verse 28 says. Mark says essentially the same thing. Mark 10, verse 45. For even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. In fact, it's identical. If you go into the gospel account given by Luke, you won't find a verse that says something like this. If you go find the context around this, essentially you'll say, well, he doesn't have this story, so he doesn't have the verse that goes along with it. And I'll say that's true. And I'll say there's a reason why it's not in there, because to whom Luke is written compared to Matthew and Mark. Matthew and Mark are written to Jews, Luke is not. And so this has context for a Jew, whereas it wouldn't for a Gentile. We'll see something else that talks about for many and what Luke does with it towards the end here. So, as I said, Matthew and Mark are written to Jews, Luke is written to Gentiles, not for Gentiles to follow Jesus' earthly ministry. It's to understand his earthly ministry as they get saved by Paul's gospel. Luke would be there with Paul often, or Paul would have a copy of Luke's gospel for them to, read. So I'm sure they made copies and left them in the churches as they traveled, but we don't really have the details of that. So let's understand who the many are. And so we certainly want to find an answer for that in Scripture. And so we're going to go into the Old Testament to find out who the many are. So Isaiah 53, 6 to 8 says, And all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed. Hang on, got Tristan joining here. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb. So he openeth not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was caught off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. So this is obviously talking about Jesus as a prophecy. All right. Hi, everyone. I'll let you interrupt. I have to see what the chat say. I can't see them. Um, so when it says all we, we're talking about Israel here. Isaiah is written to Israel. And then it says, He hath laid on him the iniquity of us all in verse 6. It's talking about Israel once again. Down in verse 8, you have my people. So verse 11 to 12, He shall see of the travail of his soul and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore will I divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he hath poured out his soul unto death. And he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bare the sins of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. So these last two verses have many in them. And of course, what it's set up above, my people, and it says of us all. So my conclusion is the many are Israel. And I already kind of highlighted what these bullets say. My people, and that would be Isaiah's people, Israel, the iniquity of us all, talking about he died for all of Israel. Yet when you think of all people on the earth, Israel isn't everyone in the world. It's only a portion of the world. And so that's why it's called many, not all. And so verse 11 and 12, I believe, both say many. And so this is where your Old Testament takes you back to the New Testament, and you find this many being repeated here. And of course, the context of Isaiah tells you who the many are, and it would be Israel. But of course, what Paul says, and we already read this, he gave himself a ransom for all to be testified in due time. So the end of that verse is very important to what the all means. Paul does say that he died for all, but testified in due time means that it wasn't revealed initially. When Jesus died on the cross, no one knew that it was for the sins of the world. No one understood that yet. He was dying for his people. And of course, once Israel was converted, salvation was going to go to the world in the kingdom. So you can say, well, prophetically, he was going to die for everyone. Yeah, but that wasn't the immediate program. He wasn't dying for Gentiles on the cross at the time that he died. God knew that it would pay for the sins of all, but no one else knew that. So let's see some more evidence in what Paul says. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 14 to 15. For the love of Christ constraineth us, because we thus judge that if one died for all, then we're all dead. And that he died for all, that they which live should not henceforth live unto themselves, but unto him which died for them and rose again. So the only thing I'm really highlighting here is that one died for all, and that's, of course, Jesus dying for all men. Not something that was really understood in the Old Testament and the beginning of the transition into the kingdom. But once the kingdom was rejected and God brought the dispensation of grace and new teachings through Paul, he revealed the things that no one knew. Even though they had taken place, no one knew them until God revealed them. Now, what people want to do is they want to say, well, we know that Jesus died for all, so let's take that information back to the time of the cross. Well, you can't do that. Until God says something's true, you don't know that it's true. And that's what people want to do that don't rightly divide. Israel's going, Jesus is going to the Gentiles right after he's died on the cross. Well, that's not true. It's not till Acts chapter 9 that God changes programs. So I'll let you jump in before we see the last one. We're going to see another one that says for many, and then something that Luke says about it. Okay, so let's see shed for many, and we'll see or for you. So Matthew 26, verse 28, for this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. Mark 14, verse 24 says the same thing, and he said unto them, this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many. Luke, however, says something slightly differently. Luke 22, verse 20. Likewise also the cup after supper, saying, this is the New Testament in my blood, which is shed for you. Now, in the context in which Jesus says it, there's some Jews in the room, some disciples. Obviously, he's talking to Israel in the context as the people in the room. But as Luke writes it, his audience are Gentiles. And so, not that Jesus was dying for Gentiles at the time at which he said this. That's true, but no one knew it. Luke knows what Paul knows, and Paul says he died for all. So Paul says to the Gentile, he died for you, or he shed his blood for you. So I think it's quite intriguing as you compare Matthew and Mark, and often Luke. John always seems to have different stories that don't compare, but Matthew and Mark being written to Jews and Luke being written to Gentiles, you find these subtleties between how they word things. So Matthew and Mark are consistent, shed for many, he died for many. And here, Luke, which was silent on the first example, but is voicing something here, and it seems to indicate he's dying for all or shedding his blood for all. It doesn't say it that way. That's a subtlety, as I said. So there are no contradictions when you rightly divide. Jesus died for many in Israel's program. He's dying for Israel. Now they have to believe, but Paul tells us that he died for all, and again, they have to believe. People just don't get their sins paid for and disbelieve. They have to believe. So all the phrases are correct in their context, in their appropriate programs, either prophecy or mystery. Jesus did die for many, and he did die for all. It's just, as Paul said, the for all wasn't revealed until due time came. So it's really that simple. So I don't know if anybody wants to comment. We'll quiz Tristan as to what I said at the beginning since he missed it.
I just got on. I got on a little late. Sorry about that.
You didn't miss very much. Just
But the
attention.
key thing is many, not all, because the exclusivity of the nation Israel, right?
Yes, at the time of Jesus' ministry, he's sent unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He's not sent to Gentiles. So there's nothing revealed. Now, God knew this would happen. God had it planned. But as Paul says, if the principalities and powers had understood what Jesus' death had meant, they wouldn't have crucified him. So God had some meaning that he kept hidden. Part of that was there would be a joint heirs between Gentiles and Jews, and that Jesus was really doing things for all the world, not just for Israel. But that's not really expressed in the Old Testament and in prophecy.
Right, because God's just dealing with them, and that's
Yes.
the struggle. That's the struggle that people will have when they fail to divide, rightly divide.
So the for many isn't those that believe. The many aren't, well, God has predestined some to be saved and some not to be saved. That's not what it's talking about. It specifically means Israel. Now,
Yeah.
Israel still has to believe or not. They had to believe, and then in order to go into the kingdom as a nation, as a nation of people that are alive, they had to be baptized. But they at least needed to believe, and the ransom wasn't paid for those that wouldn't believe.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but the believing for salvation was really only meant for Jews, and because they rejected it, it went to Gentiles.
Yes. Now, you do find occasionally some Gentiles that either joined the nation, they were proselytes, or it'll just say that someone feared God. And basically, what I understand that to mean is they understand who Israel's God is, they understand what he's doing, They understand, in a sense, I'm on the outside. I'm not part of what God's doing, but I acknowledge that He is the true God. And in a sense, those people could have salvation, although they didn't have part in what Israel was doing as a nation. Cornelius is an example of that.
So
There
was
were
there?
others.
Oh, but what about King Cyrus?
I would say Nebuchadnezzar is an example of someone who acknowledged the true God, and he writes Daniel chapter 4. I think Nebuchadnezzar is a saved person who continued to live the life that he was as an idolater, as a Gentile. So Cyrus would be another. There are people in the scriptures who weren't Jews that acknowledged Israel's God. Balaam is an example of someone who understood who Israel's God was and did not fear the Lord, and he's basically condemned in a few scriptures in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Now, someone like Rahab, she ends up marrying into the lineage of Christ, and I'll say she joined the nation. Ruth, another example, she married a Jew. Shouldn't have happened, but she married a Jew and she joined the nation. She became part of the people. So the hope in past time was essentially none unless you join the nation. But I think you can find some exceptions of some people that feared God, and you might argue that they're saved, although they didn't really join Israel.
Well, and I guess it really comes back to what one of the right diviners would say is that God can't help anybody with unbelief, because that's the one thing that God requires is that
Yes.
people just believe. But it's all contingent upon what the marching orders were for that time.
Yes. Not everybody believed in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. That's silly when people say Abraham believed the gospel. Well, that's make any sense.
All right, but like Rahab, like you said about Rahab, she helped the spies, and but
And
God,
what's her testimony before she helps them as to why? She says that we've heard the stories of your God bringing you out of Egypt and the miraculous things that he's done, and we've all feared.
yeah,
And that's a testimony of someone who's believed in Jehovah. At the time, she hasn't joined the nation, but she's feared the true God, and I think she ends up joining the nation. As a result, she's spared, she and
yeah.
her family.
But essentially, she has faith.
Yes,
She shows a level of faith.
a faith in terms of whatever's going on at the time in history. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say she had faith that the spies would would help spare her family.
Well, she specifically says
Oh, you're gonna have
she
to
gives a testimony. So
pull it
we
up.
have heard how the Lord dried. Let me make this bigger so you can have a hope of.
You're gonna have to pull it up now.
Joshua 2:10, for we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when ye came out of Egypt, and what ye did unto the two kings of the Amorites that were on the other side Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. As soon as we heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. That's a testimony of belief.
Yeah, it's faith. Yeah.
Now, yes, she's trying to spare herself and her family's lives. And she's putting herself in great jeopardy by doing it.
Yeah.
The people of the city are wanting to harm her. I don't remember all the details of the story, but she has a testimony of a belief in who the true God is, and I think that's a key thing. She's not joined the nation yet, but I'll say she does by marrying into the lineage of Christ, of course. So yeah, so that's a little bit off topic, but it's still important. The faith is required, but Jesus was dying for Israel until the mystery was revealed that it had more meaning than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, the message should be go. I'm here for Israel and the Gentiles, and he never teaches that to his apostles. Even in Acts chapter 10, Peter says it's unlawful to associate with one from another nation. This goes to where people say that in Matthew 28 they're sent to the Gentiles, but Peter says no. Let me find where he says it. And he said unto them, You know how that it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come unto one of another nation, but God has showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean. And of course, the whole point of this vision that he has was to show him, look, Peter, I didn't tell you, but I'm doing something different. But anyway, the whole point was even after the cross, Israel's still going to Jews. The apostles are still going to Jews. After Acts chapter 9, when Paul's saved, Peter doesn't understand that. He's still operating on the marching orders that he has. So Jesus died for Israel, but Paul says, surprise, no one knew this. Now there was a plan of Gentile salvation in the kingdom and the prophetic program, but we haven't seen that come to pass. All right. Anybody else? So to me, you don't have to agree with me. It's very clear. The for many is what it means. It means Israel, and the for all is what it means. It means everybody. And in spite of it being for all of Israel and for all people in both contexts, it still required faith to receive the gift.
What were the two scriptures again?
Gosh, I don't know where they are.
Oh. One was in John, and one was Paul's quote.
Well, Matthew, it's on the screen. Matthew 20:28.
Okay.
Gave his life a ransom for many.
Yeah.
Paul says he gave himself a ransom for all, but to be testified in due time. Then the other one had to do with the Lord's Supper, is he shed his blood for many, and for you. So there's two different stories in Matthew and Mark that have this for many, and then Luke only has the for you. He doesn't have these for many. And then, of course, what Paul says, he says something in Timothy and Corinthians that says he died for all. And again, the other one was the Lord's Supper, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. So, again, someone might think there's a contradiction, or they'll give a bad explanation in order to make there no contradiction. They'll say, well, for many means they're saved. For all meant, well, he died for everybody, but you had to believe. That's what many means. Well, that's not what many means. And of course, the Calvinistic view is totally out of whack as well. So again, when I was starting to understand right division, these are things I had to understand myself so that when someone would bring up these things, you can answer them. You talk to, say, a Baptist, and he'll give you his view. How do you resolve what Jesus taught with what Paul said? And then they go and they parrot what someone told them, and they said, yes, it all makes sense. You don't have to rightly divide all the New Testaments for me, and they have an explanation. So, all right.
Keep saying Calvinistic view. What do you mean by Calvinistic?
Well, the Calvinistic view is that God has predetermined who would be saved and who wouldn't be saved. So Jesus only died for those that would be saved. He didn't die for those that won't be saved. They can't believe. They have no ability to be saved. God's not predestined them, and that's plain wrong. The predestination is, if you do believe, here's what happens. You're part of the elect. You will be conformed to the image of Christ. You will have for us, we'll have a home in heaven, and for Jews, they'll have, something different. Those are the things that are predetermined, not who. It's how, and the meaning has been predetermined. But God says, what does it say about the foolish that believe, or something like that? Oops, wrong thing. I can't think of the verse, but
that sort of falls on the lines of that, like 144 that what the Mormons teach. Basically, the same thought process, or same, religious structure. It's not based off of faith; it's just based off of whatever their concept is.
Yeah, I don't fully understand what they believe, but they're certainly erring it. But this is the one I'm thinking of, 1 Corinthians 1, verse 21. For after that which in the wisdom of God The world by wisdom knew not God. It pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. So God, what God foreordained or predetermined was, here's how people will get saved. They're going to hear my word and they're going to believe it. And that's true all throughout time. That's not the gospel of Christ. It's whatever was said. So Abraham heard God say something, he believed it, and that justified him. So that's what's predetermined. It's not who. And there are plenty of people who've heard the truth and have not responded. And God will say, I didn't send that person to hell. He sent himself. It's God's will that all men be saved. So how can someone say that God predetermined who would be saved and who wouldn't? So that's what Calvinism teaches.
And I think a lot of other there's the 5 points of Calvinism also, right? Basically.
Well, I don't know how many count points there are there. It's wrong. But go ahead if you want to teach us the 5 points. Tulip.
But once they said the 5 points, I said, well, that's probably man-made. Definitely not. Doesn't sound scriptural.
Yes, and I've heard it all before. I don't really remember it, but we're reprobate, and unless God save us, which is true, if God doesn't save us, we can't be saved. But God didn't decide who would be saved; He decided how. And if you do believe, here's what happens. Here's what you get. Everybody will get the Holy Ghost.
Here's a good contradiction to that whole uh, Calvinism teaching or predestination is we don't need evangelists. Nobody needs to do any more work for God.
Yeah, if God's determined that you're going to be saved, He's going to take care of it, whether you obey or not. They come up with some silly statements that they make, but of course, what God would say is the only way someone's going to get saved is if people get out there and share the gospel. There will be people in hell who could have responded but never heard. Now, Paul tells us everyone will be without excuse. You won't be able to say, I never heard, particularly in this day and age. You can't claim, well, I never heard anything about Jesus. And you may not have heard the gospel, presented clearly in a way when you were in the right frame of mind to hear it. But Paul basically says there won't be anybody who will to say it wasn't fair. I never had a chance. I have to give that one to Ken all the time because he says there's somebody out in the fields of Africa that never got to hear the gospel. Well, the Bible says contrary. Anyway, anything else? I think I answered the Calvinist issue. We can press on to the other topic, which is essentially going to be the same kind of right division thing, but I will entertain another question or comment.